This is Dr. Earle Williams on Tidewater Waves.
It's nice to get you up here, Dr. Earle. Thank you for coming out.
Oh, glad to be here.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so we'll get straight into it. Who is Dr. Earle?
Well, my full name is Earle Williams. I go by Dr. Earle a lot. It's just a lot more convenient. But I am a forensic clinical psychologist, which basically means that in addition to doing all the other things that other psychologists do, such as psychotherapy, psychological testing, individual, group, family, couples therapy, in addition to all of those things, I also do forensic evaluations, which means, and a lot of times people think that when I say forensic, I'm dealing with dead bodies or blood stains and other things that people see on television in programs like Forensic Files. And that is forensic science. I am not a forensic scientist. What I am is a forensic clinical psychologist, which basically means I do evaluations on defendants to see if they are competent to stand trial and whether or not they were sane or insane when they committed their offense. I also do evaluations on defendants that have been adjudicated as sex offenders, found guilty of a sex offense. And the judge will have someone like myself do an evaluation to see what the chances are of that individual repeating that sexual offense. In other words, how likely are they to reoffend? So that way it helps the judge make a decision as to whether they can be treated in the community or whether or not they should be sent to prison and treated in the penitentiary.
Okay, nice. Thank you for that detailed background for the viewers that may not know all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what got you into that field?
Of forensic psychology or psychology in general?
Psychology in general. Yeah.
Well, that's a really great question. Because first of all, I ended up going to prison. And I hadn't been a juvenile delinquent or anything like that, but when my mother was killed by a hit and run driver, I just went off and I ended up in prison. And so then when I got out and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, one of the other things that I wanted to know was, why did I do that? Why did I engage in criminal activity? Because it wasn't really part of my character or part of my growing up or part of my juvenile experience. So that's why I got into studying psychology. So I didn't study psychology to become a psychologist. I studied psychology because I wanted to know what the hell was going on with me. What was I thinking? And from there, I decided to become a psychologist.
Okay. Now, what exactly did you do? Did you want to get into that?
Well, I back in the day, and what I'm talking about is in the mid-'60s. In the mid-'60s, this was when movies like Superfly came out, and
The Mac.
And I was a Mac. That's what I was considered. I was considered a Mac, which basically meant that I was a thief. I was a hustler. I was a con man. And so I had gotten into a group of people, and this is what they were doing, and so I was doing it right along with them. So that's what I was doing. But then, a woman approached me and wanted to choose me. That's what we used to call it back in the day. When a prostitute chooses you, then you become a pimp.
Okay, right,
and so I was a pimp. And we would go to I set her up to work in Providence, Rhode Island, because the pimping game in Boston, where I was raised and was living, was pretty heavy. So there was less competition in Providence, Rhode Island, and Providence, Rhode Island is only about 45 minutes from Boston. And so I took her down there and I set her up. And then a couple of times, after a while, she wanted to go to New York and recruit other women to work for me. And so we did that too. But that's what I was doing. I was mostly a thief. I was basically a thief. As a matter of fact, to tell you the honest to God truth, you know, back in the day, I used to look down on pimps, you know, because they were dependent on women for their money, you know. And I was the type of person, I get it myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I get my own money. I don't need a woman to get my money. You know, I'll go out to steal something. And so what we do, we would break into warehouses and we would steal television sets, and broke into stores and would steal a safe, you know, stuff like that. And so that's what I did for a couple of years.
Okay. All right. So with that, you know, background of yourself, like, what did you find out going into psychology that, you know, influenced that behavior?
Well, you know what? Here's what I found out. There really wasn't a whole lot of psychotherapy back then. You know, nobody was getting psychotherapy. I mean, it just wasn't in the black community. You know, in the white community, it was there.
Was it looked down upon?
No, well, it just was non-existent.
Okay.
You know, we didn't even have an opinion about it. You know, I mean, the only thing that social workers, you know, so mental health workers, the only mental health workers we were really aware of were social workers. And social workers, although they can do psychotherapy now, but back then, they primarily were the ones that would deal with women that were applying for welfare, and they would go into women's houses and check to see if they had a man living there, you know, to try to get them off welfare, you know, if they had a man living with them, and things like that. You know, so really that's the only mental health issues that were prominent or available, you know, to us back then. I say all that to say that what I've discovered getting into psychology is that I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, and from depression. And one of the things about depression, especially with men, you know, and I see this with a lot of men that I work with now as a forensic clinical psychologist, is that anger is a big part of depression with men in particular. I mean, women too, but men in particular, you know, who will act out on the anger. And that's what I was doing. I was acting out on the anger that I was experiencing because my mother was killed by a white male hit-and-run driver. And my mother, who was a Navajo and raised by black people, used to tell me stories of putting furniture against the door to keep out the Ku Klux Klan because she was raised in Alabama by black people when she was a teenager. So that's where I was coming from.
Okay. So when you decided to get into psychology, what was that point that, you know, really made you want to do this many years in it, you know, and just really dedicate to it?
Well, here's my thought, you know, on anyone that is trying to get their act together and trying to do something, you know. The whole trick, the whole purpose of life is to find your niche, you know, find out what your plan is, find out or if you want to put it in spiritual terms, find out God's plan for your life, you know. And so when you can discover what it is you're supposed to be doing, you know, I mean, because question becomes, why were you born? What are you doing here?
Purpose.
What is your purpose? You know, and so psychology is my purpose. I am doing what I am supposed to do. And so that's why I have stayed with it this long, you know.
Okay. Nice. So yeah, I want to also ask you, you know, I know you explained a little before, but like for the, you know, viewers and the people out there,
Sure.
What exactly does a forensic clinical psychologist do? What are your duties?
Okay, well, like I said, we do evaluations on defendants to see if they're competent to stand trial. In other words, do they know enough about courtroom procedure to aid their attorney in mounting an adequate defense? Questions like, what is the job of a judge? What's the job of a jury? Do you have to plead guilty? What is an oath? And different questions about the basics of courtroom procedure to see if they're competent to stand trial. Now, if they're incompetent to stand trial, it could be from ignorance. They just don't have a lot of experience with it. It could also be because they're mentally ill. It could also be because they're mentally retarded. So there are a lot of different things that can impact a defendant's ability for competency to stand trial. So that's one piece. The other piece is sanity at the time of offense. In other words, was the individual sane or insane when they committed this offense? Now, the thing is, sometimes a person can be insane, and when I say insane, have a diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, which are both mental illnesses that involve a psychotic reaction, can involve a psychotic reaction, or even depression with psychotic. And when I say psychotic, it's what other people out here in the street call insane or crazy. Psychotic meaning someone that is just out of touch with reality. Now, just because someone is diagnosed with schizophrenia does not necessarily mean that they were insane at the time of that offense. Because mental illness is not something that is 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Mental illness comes and goes. You can be schizophrenic and psychotic one day and then be okay for a while. Some people are okay with medicine, some people are okay without medicine. So it's kind of a give and take, in terms of whether or not they were sane or insane at the time of the offense.
Okay.
And so that's the other thing I do.
Okay.
And then I also testify in court as an expert witness.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I've done other things, besides forensic psychology. I mean, I'm also an author. I've written 3 books. I have been a college professor. I've taught at the College of William and Mary. I've taught at Hampton University for 5 years. I was teaching at a graduate school in Virginia Beach, South University.
Okay.
So I've done a variety of things. So just all of it is under the rubric of being a psychologist, but different
branches.
Right.
Right. Okay. So yeah, we'll get into that after this next question. How do you feel about the mental health awareness that's going on right now in society?
Well, I think that people are more aware of it, but I think, which is a good thing, people will say, when, matter of fact, all of these crimes that we see lately, they'll say that have a mental problem, which isn't necessarily true. Like the guy that was sent out bombs to different politicians, Democratic politicians recently,
right.
that they caught in Florida. They say, oh, well, he has a mental.
Kind of a scapegoat.
Yeah. But he knew what he was doing. Do you notice he didn't send out any bombs to Republicans?
Right, yeah.
He only sent out bombs to Democrats, So he knew what he was doing. Although they'll try to throw that mental thing in, just like the school shooting in Florida, and say, well, he had a mental illness, But a mental illness does not necessarily mean that he was insane at the time of the offense. So I just want to kind of, so yes, it's good that there's more of an awareness of mental illness, but still there is a stigma attached to it, So having a mental illness, people don't think about having a mental illness the same way that they might think about having diabetes, or having cancer. or having asthma or something like that, something physical.
Right. Okay. So yeah, to go back and talk about, you wrote a few books. You also, have a YouTube channel dedicated to some of your work. I want you to kind of expand on that a little bit and talk about what you have going on.
Okay, good. Yes. Well, I've written 3 books.
Okay.
Let me start there. My first book is Psychology from Scripture. And I wrote that while I was working at Eastern State Hospital. Eastern State Hospital is in Williamsburg, and it is the first mental hospital in the country. That's the very first one, was at Eastern State Hospital. And so the reason I wrote that book is because and plus, this is the first time that I had really dealt with seriously mentally ill people. When I was in Boston, all of my internships and practicums, during my years of education, focused on people that were suffering from depression or adjustment disorder or things that did not involve a psychotic component. In other words, they weren't out of touch with reality. But then I came here to Eastern State Hospital, came down here to Virginia in '87. And my first job was at Eastern State Hospital. And these are people that were seriously mentally ill. These are people that suffer from what we call command hallucinations. That is, having voices in their head playing over and over again, telling them to kill themselves, kill somebody else, steal something, do something. Those are what we call command hallucinations. I was also dealing with people that were having visual hallucinations. That is, seeing things that no one else can see, seeing things that really don't exist. And then there's always tactile, stimulation. That is, people kind of feeling things, feeling bugs and things crawling all over them. That is what we call a tactile hallucinations. And so that's what I was up against when I was at Eastern State Hospital, dealing with seriously mentally ill. And so I asked a psychiatrist, because these are the ones, a psychologist does not prescribe medicine. I'm a clinical psychologist.
So you diagnose it?
I diagnose it,
okay,
and I treat it, and I do psychological testing. And psychological testing, the ability to do psychological testing, is what separates me from all other mental health professionals. Psychiatrists are MDs. I'm the PhD type. Psychiatrists are MDs, and their primary job is to dispense and prescribe medication. And so I would ask the psychiatrist, why do people hear voices in their head? Where do these voices come from? And why do the medications and the drugs that you give them stop people from hearing voices? And nobody could ever answer those questions for me. So I wrote this book, Psychology from Scripture, and started off with a chapter on the relationship between spiritual warfare and mental illness.
Okay.
And then I have three or four other chapters in that book. Then my second book is So You Think You're Growing 100 Facts of Life. I was working with children at a facility called the Barry Robinson Center. And I had this 10-year-old girl that kept getting into fights. And I said to her, haven't you ever heard the saying, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt? She said, no, I never heard that. I was amazed. I thought everybody had heard that, And so I wrote a book, and each page has a saying on it, like that, and a paragraph of what that saying means. Then my most recent book is Roxbury Redemption. Roxbury is the part of Boston that I'm from, and it's where a lot of the black people live in Boston. And that's where I talked about my life story, and how I became a doctor 15 years after I got out of prison.
Okay.
Now, your other question is about my YouTube.
YouTube, yep.
Yeah. So I got it. So I'm 73 years old, trying to grow old gracefully. And I have a 27-year-old son.
Okay.
27-year-old son. And I have a 42-year-old daughter, but I had a 27-year-old son. So I'm talking to my son. I said, I really want to leave some information for people for after I die. In other words, I don't want to die and take all this experience and knowledge and education to the grave with me. I want to leave something. Now, yes, I've written books, and that leaves some of it, but I want to leave more. And so one of the things he suggested is, do a YouTube. I said, oh, okay, what's a YouTube? And he explained to me what a YouTube is. And then he said, and Dad, I know you're a professor and you've been on the lecture circuit, traveling around the country, and you cannot give 2-hour lectures on YouTube. You got to keep it 4 to 8 minutes.
Right.
So I said, okay. So that's what I'm doing. So I've already discussed 5 different types of depression, and I also discussed what it feels like to have mental illness. And now I'm doing different treatments for depression. And all of that can be found at the Dr. Earle Show, YouTube.
On YouTube, okay.
Dr. Earle Show.
Nice. So where can they find your books?
Well, Amazon.
Okay.
.com has them, and I got them in the trunk of my car.
Nice, okay. Just reach out.
Cool. So if you give me a call, you can Google me, find me, give me a call. And I'm local. I'm right here in Norfolk, Virginia, and I'd be glad to get you a signed copy of any of my books.
Okay.
My autobiography is $20. My other 2 books are $10 a piece.
Okay. Nice.
And I'm available to do presentations.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we appreciate you for coming by.
Okay.
On Tide Water Waves and, being a part of the platform. We definitely want to have you back to talk more about mental health and just, other things that may be going on in the community or whatever you have going on too. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Definitely.
Thank you for including me.
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay.
All right, this is Dr. Earle, and we're out.